Hi, I'm Doug here at Global West, and I thought I'd take a minute and show you some of the new features that we're offering for our Mustang coilover kits. This would also include Falcons and Rancheros, Torinos, and so on. This little segment that we're going to do is what we've added to the coilovers. Now I have Viking coilover shocks on this side, I have QA1s over here, and this would also pertain to Penske's, which we do offer for those guys that want to race. Getting into it, what we've done is we've built spring shock extensions. So I'm going to show you how this kit goes together, and so you'll get an idea of what we're talking about. So in this particular case, whether it's a Viking or a QA1, they're going to assemble the same way. You got your base jam nut, which goes all the way down. And when you're assembling these, it is recommended that both QA1 and Viking want you to put anti-seize on, and we're going to show you about doing that. But for right now, this is what we're going to do. Is I'm going to put this together, and then so I've got my jam, then I've got the base nut, and this is what supports the coil spring. See the step here? We'll drop this down on here. These go all the way down. All right, as you can see, it drops all the way down. Now, I do want to bring a point out is our coilovers for Mustangs and the cars that we were talking about here, which is 64 through 73, we have the longest shock travel of anybody in reference to the front end coilover kits. This shock goes to the lower control arm all the way up to the top shock mount. So the reason why we do that is it gives you an infinite amount of shock travel that you need for the front end, so you can set your ride height pretty much anywhere you'd like, plus get the spring rate that you're looking for because I have shock travel, okay? When you run a real short shock in a coilover application, you can be limited on reference to what springs you can use, because if you don't have enough spring rate and you got a short shock so you don't have enough travel, you're going to run higher spring rates, and that could affect your ride if you're looking for something specific. In a racing environment, you don't have a lot of travel either, so that's another story. But we want this to be used on the street as well. So you can have a ride, you can have coilover on the front end, set your ride height where you like it, and have suspension travel where you need it without having a really stiff ride. That's one of the reasons why we do that. Second reason why we do this in a long shock, and we'll get into that when we show you how we install it on a car, is because we want to get the shock, the base, and you'll see this when we're putting it together, as close to the ball joint as possible. Instead of having it in the middle of the control arm, we want it as close to the ball joint as possible. Now, why do we want to do that? One, there's several reasons actually, but one of the main reasons is when the tire moves up and down, over bumps and what have you, and this shock is as close to the tire's center line as possible, it responds faster than if I was sitting way back over here, okay? So it's just common sense. The closer you get it to the center line, the more efficient the shock becomes. So small adjustments go a long way, where when you have a lot of leverage on the vehicle, because the shock's sitting further away from the ball joint, then what happens is you got to do a lot of adjustment on the shock to really work the shock to control what's happening out here. So the closer we get it, the better off we are. That's another reason why we run a long shock. So I'm going to continue on here. We've got a bearing kit here, thrust bearings, which is going to be, it's always standard in our kits. It goes on. Now here's where our extensions come in. We run a short spring. We do not run a long spring on these particular kits, and the reason why is because we've moved the shock closer to the ball joint, and where the arm moves up in the top, in a full droop situation, this spring, if it was down here in the middle of the shock area here, is too wide. And you could run into a situation where airborne, you'd have to be airborne, but the control arm comes over and it would tag the spring. So we want to keep the spring up in this area up here, above the upper control arm ball joint, right? So that way when the arm swings down, and I can show you this on the vehicle when we do this here shortly. But the cool thing is we do a shock extension, so it allows us to put a base, which is this, and it's designed to accept the bearing system that both QA1 and Viking do. This drops right on like this. You have the spacer, and these extensions come in different sizes. Like 64 through 6 Mustangs, for example, take the long one. 67 through 70, take this one. Here's the upper mount, just drops in accordingly. Then the spring sits on top of that. So you see what we're doing here? So when this is adjusted on the vehicle, and the upper control arm is in this area, when it swings down, it's in an open area here. It's not hitting the coil spring. Now the load transfers all the way through and is still down here towards the base of the shock. It's not at the top of the shock. It's down here, okay? So I'm going to finish putting this together so you see how this goes. See the spacer, helper spring. So it looks like this. Now, about the anti-seize. So when we're putting this together for real, we're going to put anti-seize up in this area here on the threads. Remember, there's no load right now. See, we're going to put anti-seize inside here. Now, the cool thing about it is since we have these sleeves that go over the threads, it protects the threads from road grime, rocks, and whatever. And with anti-seize, when you have anti-seize on a shock, for example, anti-seize collects everything on the road. You get so much dirt, buildup, and it's a problem, especially when you start to adjust it, because now you're adjusting the shock and putting grime in the threads and really working on that. You have to clean everything before you do any of that. But now that we've got a sleeve on here, we're protecting it. Okay, so there's a lot of positive features why we're doing that. Whether it's Viking or QA1, which is right here, it's actually the same procedure. I'll show you. Okay. Of course, we have our thrust bearings that go on next, which drop down here. My base. And this one here is 64 through 66 Mustang. So we'll just throw this on here so you get an idea what that looks like. There you go. Pretty quick, huh? And again, we'd be putting the anti-seize down in this area here. Now you may ask, why is there such a difference on the extension tubes versus the different Mustangs? Well, on a 64 through 66, on our coilover system, the lower control arm becomes an A-arm. And the sway bar pickup point is down below. It doesn't go on top of the lower arm like the 64 through 6 Mustang stock one would. So in our kits, you're going to get a new sway bar with it. And this extension right here is all, one puts the load lower on the base, but the other thing too is this whole area is open for in full droop application. So nothing comes in contact when the arm swings down, okay? This one here, 67 through 70, the stock sway bar can be used, and that's on top of the control arm. So we want to raise this up higher up and so that the end links operate down below here. If we had this combination here on a 67 through 70, this right here would interfere with the sway bar. The end links would have, they're too tall and they would get in the way because of where the shock mount is. So now we have moved everything up. So there's a reason for everything. And of course then we have different sizes depending on what you've got going on. This is a standard application now with our coilovers for the Ford product. You'll see us, this will be assembled when you get it in the box. It's ready to go. And we're going to take a minute and show you exactly how these go on the car. And this particular vehicle is going to get Vikings today. But whether it's Viking or QA1, it really doesn't matter. In fact, next week we're doing one with QA1s. All right, let's check it out.